Abigail Carter walked into the corral with her dead husband's rifle and raised it at the black stallion's head. 40 people watched. Nobody breathed. "Do it, ma'am," the bankman called. "A killer horse ain't worth the hay." Her finger touched the trigger. The stallion didn't run. He walked straight at the barrel and stopped chest-heaving eyes on hers. She lowered the gun and turned on the crowd, tears cutting through the dust on her face. "If you're a real cowboy," she said, "then prove it. Ride him. 10 minutes, $100 in gold. Before we go on. Friends, if this story finds a place in your heart, please subscribe to the channel and stay with me all the way to the end, because what happens to this widow and this horse is not what anybody in Montana Territory expected. And do me a kindness, drop the name of your town in the comments so I can see just how far this story has traveled. Now let's go back to the summer of 1876. The rifle was still warm in her hands from the sun when Abigail Carter backed out of that corral gate, and every man on the fence rail moved aside for her like she was carrying fire. Elias Bram, the bankman from Helena, stepped down off the rail with his watch chain swinging and his boots too clean for a working ranch. "Mrs. Carter." "Mr. Bram." "You just stood in a pen with an animal that has crippled 9 men in this county." "11, she said. 2 of them didn't report it because they were ashamed. That is not a defense of the animal. It wasn't meant to be." He took off his hat, and he did it the way a man does when he wants folks to see him being patient with a woman. "Ma'am, I rode 2 days to tell you what I'm about to tell you, so I'd ask you to hear it plain. Your late husband borrowed $2,400 against this property in the spring of '74. He borrowed it to buy bloodstock out of Kentucky and to build that breeding barn behind you, which as far as I can tell has never held a paying animal in its life. It held 4. It holds 1 now, and that one can't be handled." "He can be handled." "By who, ma'am?" Abigail didn't answer. Bram put his hat back on. 60 days. That's what the board authorized, and that's more than they wanted to give. 60 days, $2,400, or Willow Creek goes to auction on the courthouse steps in Miles City, and I'll have no more say in it than you will. Behind them, the stallion hit the fence with his shoulder, and the whole west section shuddered, and a man near the corner swore and jumped back. Bram didn't even turn around. "Sell him for hide and hoof. $40 maybe. Put the rest of your stock through the sale barn, take what's left, and go live with your sister in Bozeman, like a sensible woman." "I don't have a sister in Bozeman." "Then I am sorry for you, ma'am. I truly am." He walked to his buggy, and he drove off, and the dust from his wheels hung in the air a long time, because there was no wind that summer to move it. The crowd thinned out slow, the way crowds do when they're hoping for one more thing to happen. Hattie Dunn, who ran the mercantile and knew everything before it happened, came up the porch steps with her hands folded across her middle. "Abby. Hattie. You pointed a rifle at a horse in front of the whole county." "I know what I did." "Then you'll know what they're saying about it before supper." Abigail set the rifle across the porch rail and looked at her hands. They'd stopped shaking about a minute after she put the gun down, and that bothered her more than the shaking had. "Say it, Hattie." "They're saying a woman running a ranch alone is a woman 2 seasons from ruin, and here's the proof of it out in the yard, in a black horse nobody can touch. And what do you say?" Hattie was quiet a moment. She was 61 years old, and she had buried a husband and 3 children, and she did not deal in comfort. She didn't mean. "I say, Daniel Carter loved that horse better than he loved money, and I say, that's why you're standing there with your jaw set instead of packing a trunk. But loving a thing don't feed it honey, and it surely don't pay a bank." He said the horse wasn't mean. Daniel said a lot of things. He said the horse was scared. "Daniel," said Hattie carefully, "is dead." Abigail turned her face away out toward the pasture where the light was going long and gold across the dry grass. "I know that," she said. "There's not 5 minutes of my day that I don't know that." They had brought Midnight Crown out of the Judith Basin in the fall of '74, 3 years old and unhandled, black as a stove lid, with one white mark shaped like a bent crown between his eyes. That's where the name came from. Daniel named him in the wagon on the way home, laughing, saying a horse like that deserved a name that sounded like money. He had been a driving horse for a freight outfit before that. That was all anybody knew. There was scarring on his mouth from a bit that had no business in any animal's head, and a long white seam across his flank where something had cut him open and nobody had bothered to sew it right. Somebody hurt him, Daniel had said the first week. Somebody hurts every horse in this territory. No, honey, somebody hurt him regular. There's a difference between a man who's rough and a man who enjoys it, and this horse knows the difference. Look at him. He don't flinch when you raise your hand. He flinches when you smile. She hadn't understood that then. She understood it now. Daniel worked with that stallion every morning for 8 months. Never rode him. Never tried. He'd sit on an upturned bucket inside the corral and eat his breakfast in there, and Abigail would stand at the kitchen window and watch her husband eat cold biscuits 3 feet from an animal that could have killed him with one strike. "He came closer today," Daniel would say at supper. "How close?" "Close enough I could hear him breathe." "That's not close, Daniel." "Ma'am," he'd said, grinning at her across the table with his hat still on, because he never could remember to take it off in the house. "That is the closest anybody's got in 4 years. You just don't know how to count yet." Then in April of '75, a heifer got herself down in the creek bottom in a spring flood, and Daniel Carter went in after her on a sorrel gelding with a rope in his hand, and the bank gave out under him, and that was all. They found him a mile and a half downstream. Howe was 34 years old. 27 men had tried the stallion since the funeral. Some of them had asked. Most of them hadn't. That first summer, the word got around that the Carter widow had a horse she couldn't handle, and men came out of the hills to handle it for her. And every last one of them came to the door with his hat in his hand and left with his hat in the dirt. Tom Ratliff went first. He was a decent hand, and he did it decent, and the horse threw him into the fence rail so hard it broke 2 boards and Ratliff's collarbone with them. He lay there in the dust and laughed at the sky. "Ma'am," he said when they got him up, "I've rode broncs in 3 states, and I have never once been thrown by an animal that was looking at me the whole time." "What do you mean looking at you?" "I mean he wasn't bucking. Bucking is a horse trying to get something off his back. That there is a horse trying to make a point." The Sawyer brothers came in June. They came with a running W rig, which is a set of ropes that drops a horse's front legs out from under him at a run, and it is a thing that is done to horses, and Abigail had never seen it done, and she never saw it again. The stallion went down. Hard. He got up. Both Sawyer boys backed to the gate, and the older one, Webb Sawyer, who was not a coward, stood there with the rope slack in his hands and his face gone gray. "Ma'am, I'll not take your money." "You haven't earned any." "No, ma'am, I mean I'll not take it if you offer. That horse got up and he did not come at me. He come at the rope. He hunted the rope out of my hands and he stomped it flat, and then he stood there, and he waited to see if I'd pick it up again." He wiped his mouth. "I've seen mean horses. Mean horses come at the man." "Then what is he?" Webb Sawyer looked back at the corral for a long moment. "He's careful," he said. "Which is worse?" There was a Texan in July. A big, loud man named Bull Hendricks, who had a bad reputation in 2 counties and a saddle worth more than most men's outfits. He put a twitch on that stallion's nose, which is a loop of cord. You twist down on the tenderest part of an animal to make him stand. And the stallion stood, and Bull Hendricks got a leg over him, and for about 4 seconds, it looked to the whole crowd like the thing was done. Then the stallion took him into the fence sideways at a dead run and scraped him off along 30 feet of rail like a man scraping mud off a boot. Hendricks got carried out. The stallion stood in the middle of the corral with the twitch still hanging off his nose, and he did not move, and he did not make a sound. And Abigail climbed the rail and walked out there in front of 11 men who were shouting at her to stop, and she reached up and untwisted that cord and took it off him. He didn't touch her. He never had touched her. That was the part nobody believed. Samuel Whitaker came on the 3rd Sunday in July, driving a matched pair, wearing a coat in 94-degree heat, because Samuel Whitaker was a man who would rather sweat than be underdressed. He owned 40,000 acres north and east of her. He had bought most of it from widows and busted men and one Norwegian family who had spelled their name wrong on the deed and lost 11 years of work over it. He did not knock. He stood at the bottom of the porch steps and took his hat off, which was the closest thing to knocking he did. Abigail. Mr. Whitaker. Now we're neighbors, and I'd take it kindly if you'd use my Christian name. I'd take it kindly if you'd state your business, sir. He smiled. He had a good smile. That was the trouble with him. He'd have been easier to hate if he'd been ugly about it. My business is water, he said. Same as everybody's business this year. You've got 1.25 miles of Willow Creek running through the bottom of this place, and it's the only live water between here and the mussel shell that hasn't quit. And you've got a banknote you can't pay. How would you know what I've got with the bank? Because Elias Bram eats supper at my table twice a month, Whitaker said, easy as weather. I'm not going to insult you by lying about it. That's something. I'll give you $1,800 for the whole place, stock included, and I'll do it inside of a week so you don't have to stand on a courthouse step and hear strangers bid on your kitchen. The note is $2,400. Yes, ma'am, it is. Then your offer leaves me $600 in debt with no land. My offer leaves you free, he said, which at your age is worth considerably more than $600. You're 30 years old, Abigail. You're a handsome woman. You have got a life ahead of you that has nothing to do with alkali dirt and a dead man's mortgage. And every day you stand out here fighting a fight you cannot win, you are spending that life. She was quiet a moment. Then she said, You want the creek? I want the creek. And the horse. Whitaker's smile changed just slightly at the corners. The horse, he said, is $40 of hide, and a story people will tell for 20 years. And ma'am, if you'll permit me one hard word, that animal is the reason you're in this hole. Daniel put $2,400 into bloodstock and a breeding barn on the strength of a stallion nobody can put a saddle on. He bet this ranch on a horse, and then he left you holding the note. Abigail came down one step. Say that again. Ma'am, I meant no. Say it again, Mr. Whitaker, and say it slower, because I want to be certain of what I heard before I decide what to do about it. Whitaker put his hat on. 60 days, he said. My offer stands for 30 of them. After that it goes to 1,500, and after the auction it goes to whatever the court says, and I'll still be your neighbor either way, and I'll still tip my hat to you on the road. That's how business is done, ma'am. It isn't personal. It's my husband's grave on that hill, Abigail said. It is nothing but personal. That night, she did the accounts at the kitchen table with a lamp turned low because coal oil cost money too. 41 head of cattle, and 11 of them wouldn't bring anything at all in a dry year. 9 horses counting the 2 old harness mares. A wagon. A breeding barn with 8 box stalls and a hayloft that Daniel had built with his own hands, and in one of those stalls, a black stallion out of the Judith Basin who was on paper worth more than everything else on the place put together. On paper. Because a stallion is worth what men will pay for his colts, and no man in Montana Territory would pay $2 for a colt out of a horse that had put 11 men on the ground. She wrote the number at the bottom. She looked at it for a long time. Then she went out to the corral in her nightdress with a shawl over her shoulders, barefoot in the warm dust, and she stood at the rail in the dark. He came. He always came at night. That was the thing. In daylight with men on the rail and ropes in the air, he was a black storm looking for something to break. At night, with nobody watching, he'd come drifting across that corral like smoke and stand 3 feet from her and breathe. Not closer. Never closer. 3 feet every time, like there was a wall there only he could see. You have ruined me, she told him. He blew out through his nose. Do you know that? Do you have any notion? $2,400 in a barn, and my husband's whole entire heart, and you won't let one single soul lay a hand on you. He shifted his weight. The white crown between his eyes caught the starlight. He sat out here and ate his breakfast with you, she said, and her voice cracked all the way through the middle of it. Every morning for 8 months. Cold biscuits. Because he thought you were worth it. He thought you were scared and not mean. And I have 27 men and 11 broken bones that say my husband was wrong, and I need you to tell me he wasn't. The stallion didn't move. I need somebody, Abigail said, to tell me he wasn't wrong. She stood there until her feet went cold in the dust. Then she went inside and lit the lamp again and got out a sheet of paper, and she wrote it out fair and clear, and in the morning she rode into Willow Creek and put it on Jed Pyle's counter at the newspaper office and told him to print 200 of them. Jed read it twice. "Mrs. Carter." "Print it, Jed." "Ma'am, $100 in gold." "Print it." "You don't have $100 in gold." "I have my mother's wedding set and a silver service that came from Ohio in a wagon," Abigail said, "and Merrill at the assay office will give me 110 for the lot, and he already has, and it's in a coffee tin under my bed, so print it." Jed Pyle looked at that piece of paper a while longer. "You sold your mother's rings." "Print it." He printed it. It said, "To any man who calls himself a cowboy, Willow Creek Ranch, 10 minutes astride the black stallion known as Midnight Crown. $100 in gold paid, same day, no conditions. If you are a real cowboy, come and prove it. Mrs. Abigail Carter, owner." They came like it was a camp meeting. By the 4th of August, there were wagons parked a quarter-mile down the road, and men sleeping in her hay meadow, and somebody selling fried pies out of the back of a buckboard. And Hattie Dunn moved a table of goods out from the mercantile and set up shop by the gate, because Hattie Dunn had not survived 61 years by being sentimental. Abigail stood on the porch and watched 120 people turn her husband's ranch into a fair. "They're not here for the horse," she said. Hattie counted coins into a cash box. "No, honey. They're here to watch a woman fail. Some of them. Some of them are here for the pie." Hattie shut the box. "And a few of them are here because they've never in their life seen a woman put $100 in gold on a fence post and dare the entire male sex to come pick it up, and they wanted to be able to say they was there." They ran 4 men that first day. A boy of 19 from Fort Benton went 11 seconds and got up crying, not from pain, but from the pure fright of it. A Crow horseman named Two Elk went the longest of anybody that whole month, near 2 minutes, and he came off clean and landed on his feet and stood there looking at that stallion with something on his face that was not anger. Abigail met him at the gate. "Sir, are you hurt?" "No." "Would you try again tomorrow? I'll not count it against the money." 2. Elk shook his head slowly. "That horse is not fighting me," he said. "Everyone says that." "Then everyone is right." He picked up his hat and knocked the dust out of it against his leg. "He is fighting a man who is not here anymore, and every time one of us climbs up, he thinks that man has come back." He walked away toward his horse. Abigail went after him 3 steps. "Then how do I fix it?" Two Elk stopped. "You do not fix it, ma'am," he said. "You wait for someone he believes." Charm. Rance Coyle came on the 9th day. He was Whitaker's foreman, and he came in a good hat with 4 of Whitaker's riders behind him. And Samuel Whitaker himself sat up on the seat of a spring wagon at the back of the crowd with his hands folded, saying nothing. Watching. Abigail knew what it was the second she saw it. It was not a man trying to win $100. It was a man sent to prove something. Coyle didn't ask for a saddle. He asked for a snubbing post and a war bridle, and when Abigail said there was no war bridle on the place, he pulled one out of his own saddlebag because he had brought it. "Mr. Coyle?" "Ma'am." "That rig cuts a horse's mouth. That rig gets a horse's attention. Not on my place it doesn't." Coyle turned around then, and he smiled at her, the way men smile when there are 40 people watching, and they have already decided how the story is going to be told at supper. "Mrs. Carter, you put a notice in the newspaper that said no conditions, 200 copies. I read one in a saloon in Miles City, and so did every man in it." He held up his hands open easy. "Now you can pull that notice down and tell all these folks the widow's got rules after all. That's your right. But you can't have it printed both ways, ma'am." The crowd made a sound, not a cheer. Something worse than a cheer. Abigail stood there with her hands at her sides. 10 minutes, she said, and if you draw blood, you're off my land inside of one." They snubbed him tight to the post, and it took them 4 minutes and 2 more men to do it. And the whole time the stallion never screamed, which Abigail could never afterward explain to anybody how he never once screamed. Coyle got up. He got up, and he stayed up, and it was not good riding. It was punishment, and he had a quirt in his right hand, and he was using it on the horse's shoulder on the downstroke, which is not a thing a man does to steer. 10 seconds. 20. At about 40 seconds, Rance Coyle laid that quirt across the stallion's face. Abigail went over the rail. She did not remember going over it. There were men who told the story for years afterward, how the widow came off that fence rail in a work dress with a hay hook in her hand, and what she was going to do with the hay hook, nobody knew, including her. But she never got there. Because when the quirt came across his eye, the stallion did not buck. He stopped. He stopped dead in the middle of the pen with a man on his back, and he stood there shaking from the withers down, and he took it. And Rance Coyle, who had been expecting a fight, hit him again out of pure surprise, and the horse still stood, and something in that crowd changed all at once. 40 people going quiet in the space of one breath. A woman near the gate said, "Oh, don't." Coyle raised his arm the third time, and a man's voice said from somewhere out past the fence line, not loud at all, "That'll do." It was not a shout. It didn't have to be. It landed in that silence like a stone in a still pond, and every head on that fence turned to find it. There was a rider sitting out past the corner post on a gray horse with a bedroll behind the cantle and a pack mule on a lead. Nobody had seen him come. He was not young, and he was not old, dark-bearded, gaunt through the face, and his outfit was so worn and so plain that later on, not one person could recall a single detail of it except that his boots were bad. He was not looking at the crowd. He was looking at the stallion. Rance Coyle turned in the saddle. "You say something to me." I said, "That'll do." "And who in the hell are you?" The stranger swung down off the gray. He did it slow like a man whose knees hurt, and he dropped his reins and walked over to the rail and put one hand on the top board and stood there. "Mister," he said, "you got 50 seconds left of your 10 minutes, and he ain't thrown you. You want to know why?" Coyle didn't answer. "'Cause he quit," the stranger said. "That's not a horse getting broke. That's a horse deciding the whipping is shorter if he don't move. I've seen men do the same in a stockade." He looked up at Coyle then for the first time. "You climb down off him now, and I'll not say another word about it. You hit him again in front of these people, and I'll take that quirt away from you, and I'd rather not on account of I'd have to do it in front of a lady." Nobody breathed. Rance Coyle looked at the crowd. He looked at Samuel Whitaker up on the wagon seat. He looked at 40 faces that had, in the space of about 90 seconds, stopped being on his side. He got down. He unsnubbed the rope with his back to everybody and threw the war bridle in the dirt and walked out the gate, and he stopped in front of the stranger on the way past. "You made a mistake today, Drifter." "Reckon I've made worse." Coyle went. Whitaker's wagon went. The crowd stood around another 20 minutes waiting for something, and then began in ones and twos to remember it was supper time. Abigail Carter was still standing in the middle of her own corral with a hay hook in her hand. She looked down and saw it, and didn't know what to do with it, so she set it against the post very carefully. The way you set something down when your hands are not steady and you don't want anyone to know. The stallion was 10 feet away, with a cut across his cheekbone. He was not looking at her. He was looking past her at the man on the rail. Abigail turned around. "Sir?" "Ma'am, I don't know your name." "Caleb Walker." "Mr. Walker, I'd be obliged if you'd come up to the house. There's coffee and there's a piece of ham, and it's not charity, it's a thank you, and I'd like it accepted." "That's kindly, ma'am." He didn't move off the rail. "In a minute if it's all the same." She waited. He kept looking at the horse. "Mr. Walker." "Yes'm." "Are you here about the $100? "No, ma'am." "Then why are you here?" Caleb Walker was quiet for a while. Out in the pen, the stallion took one step toward the rail and stopped and stood there with his head low and his sides going in and out. "I was on the road to Miles City," Caleb said at last. "Man in a wagon give me a newspaper for the fire. I read it before I burned it." He rubbed his thumb along the top board. "It said if you're a real cowboy, prove it." "And you are one." "No, ma'am. I don't hardly know what that word means anymore, and I've heard it my whole life." "Then I don't understand what you're doing at my fence." He finally turned his head and looked at her, and Abigail Carter, who had spent 16 months being looked at by men who pitied her, or wanted her land, or wanted to be the one who fixed her, did not recognize what was in that man's face, because nobody had looked at her that way since April of '75. I wasn't looking at her like a problem. "Ma'am," Caleb said, "I've been standing out there past that corner post the better part of 2 hours watching him. He didn't buck that fella off. He didn't try. 20-some men is what I heard down the road, and he's put every one of 'em in the dirt, but he don't put 'em in the dirt the same way twice, and he don't ever chase 'em once they're down. Have you noticed that?" "Yes." "Has anybody else?" "No." Caleb nodded slowly, like she'd confirmed something he'd rather not have been right about. "He ain't come at you neither," he said. "Not once. You walked out in the middle of that pen just now with a hay hook and murder in your eye, and he give you room. He's never touched me." "No, ma'am, and he never will." Caleb straightened up off the rail and turned his hat around in his hands one time, and then he put it on. "There's a thing folks say about a horse like that. They say he's mean. Then when mean don't fit, they say he's spoiled. Then when that don't fit, they say he's crazy, because crazy is the word men use when they've run out of ways to blame the animal for what was done to him." Abigail's throat closed up. "My husband," she said, and had to stop and start again. "My husband used to say." "Yes'm. He used to say that horse wasn't violent, that he was just afraid. And every man in this county has been telling me for 16 months that Daniel was a fool." Caleb Walker looked past her out at the black stallion standing alone in the middle of that corral in the last of the daylight, with a quirt cut on his face and 27 men behind him and nothing in front of him at all. "Ma'am," he said, "that horse isn't angry." "Then what is he?" "He's protecting himself." Abigail set the ham on the table, and Caleb Walker looked at it like a man looking at something behind glass. "Sit down, Mr. Walker." "Ma'am, my clothes ain't fit for a kitchen." "Neither is my temper. Sit down." He sat. He took his hat off and held it on his knee under the table the whole meal, and he ate slow, which she noticed because hungry men eat fast unless they've learned somewhere not to. "How long since you ate at a table?" "Which one?" "Any." Caleb thought about it. "Bozeman. February, I believe." "It's August." "Yes'm." She poured the coffee and sat down across from him and put both hands around her cup and did not drink it. "I'm going to say a thing, and I'd like it to come out right," she said. "I have had 27 men on this place in 16 months. Every last one of them wanted something. Money, or the story, or the ranch, or me. And 2 of them wanted all 4 and said so at my own gate." She looked up. "So I'd like to know what you want before you sleep in my barn, because I'm tired, sir, and I have not got it in me to be surprised again." Caleb set his fork down. "I want to sit by that fence," he said. "That's not an answer." "It's the only one I got, ma'am." "For how long?" "I don't know." "That's not an answer either." "No, ma'am, it ain't." He turned his cup a quarter turn on the table. "But I'd be lying if I gave you a number, and I'd rather be useless than a liar. Some of 'em come around in 9 days, some never do. I had one in Wyoming took 41 and then died of a colic in the spring, so all I bought that horse was 6 weeks of peace, and I'd do it again." "I have 51 days, Abigail said. "Till what?" "Till a man from Helena sells my husband's ranch on a courthouse step." Caleb was quiet. "Then I'd best not waste any," he said. The screen door banged, and Hattie Dunn came in without knocking, because Hattie Dunn had not knocked on that door since Daniel Carter was alive to complain about it, and she stopped dead when she saw the stranger at the table. "Abby." "Hattie, this is Mr. Walker. I know who he is. Everybody from here to the creek knows who he is." Hattie set her cash box down on the sideboard hard. "You put yourself between Rance Coyle and a quirt in front of 40 people." "Yes'm." "Do you know who Rance Coyle works for?" "I reckon I found out about the time he got in the wagon." "Then you're either brave or stupid, and I have known a great many men, and it's mostly the second one." Hattie folded her arms. "What are you charging her?" Hattie. "No, I'll ask it. Somebody in this house ought to ask it, and it ain't going to be her, so." She looked at Caleb. "What's your price, mister?" "Nothin', ma'am." "Nobody works for nothing." "I ain't working." "Then what do you call it?" Caleb picked his hat up off his knee and set it on the table, which Hattie later said was the moment she decided about him, though she could never explain why. "Ma'am," he said, "I've been drifting 9 years. I don't own a thing but a gray horse, a mule, and a bad opinion of myself, and I have not in all that time seen anything I wanted to stay for." He nodded toward the window. "I saw one today." Hattie Dunn stood there a long moment. "The horse," she said flatly. "Yes'm." "You're staying for the horse." "I am." "Mister, that horse has broke 11 bones in this county." "Yes'm. And not one of 'em was a woman's." Hattie opened her mouth and then closed it, and she picked up her cash box and went to the door, and at the door she stopped. "There's a betting book at the Antler," she said. "Started tonight. Men are laying money on how many days you last." Abigail stood up. "They're what?" "Don't take it personal, honey. They'd bet on rain if rain was interesting." Hattie pushed the screen open. "For what it's worth, I put $2 on him." $2 on him lasting how long? "On him lasting," Hattie said, and let the door bang. He slept in the hayloft that first night, and he was at the corral before daylight. And when Abigail came out with the milk pail, he was sitting in the dirt with his back against the outside of the rail and his hat over his knee and his hands empty. She stood a while watching him. "Mr. Walker." "Ma'am?" "You're facing the wrong way." "No, ma'am." "You can't see him." "He can see me," Caleb said. "That's the part that matters. He's been looked at by 27 men who wanted something off him. He ain't hardly ever been in the same country as a man who wasn't looking." "How long will you sit there?" "Till the sun moves." "And then?" "Then I'll get up and water your stock and fix that west section he keeps knocking down because I'll not eat a woman's ham for free, and then I'll come back and sit some more." She went and did the milking, and when she came back, he had not moved, and the stallion was standing 40 feet off in the middle of the pen, with his head up and his ears locked forward on the back of that man's hat, like it was the only object in Montana territory. The first ones came out at 10 in the morning. They came in a wagon with 3 men and a jug, and they leaned on the rail 20 feet from where Caleb sat, and one of them called out, "Hey, mister, he's behind you." Caleb didn't turn around. "Mister, horse'll kick your head off. He's 40 foot away. How'd you know that you ain't looked?" "I heard him quit chewin'." That shut them up for about 4 minutes, which Abigail counted from the porch, and then they started again, and they kept it up for 2 hours until Hattie Dunn came down from her table at the gate and asked them whether they were buying anything, and when they said no, she said, "Then get," and they got, because there were 2 things in Willow Creek County a sensible man did not argue with, and Hattie was both of them. By the 3rd day, the Antler had a proper book on it. By the 5th day, there were people driving out from town on a Sunday to eat a picnic and watch a man sit in the dirt. "They're calling you the dirt preacher," Abigail told him, setting a plate down on the rail post. "That's not bad. It's meant to be. Most things are, ma'am." He took the plate. "What are they calling you?" She didn't answer that. "That's what I figured," Caleb said. On the 6th day, the stallion came to 20 feet and stood there for an hour and a half and then walked away like he was disgusted with himself. On the 7th day, he came to 20 feet in the morning and 15 in the afternoon, and Caleb did not turn around either time, and that night at supper, Abigail asked him why not. "'Cause the day I turn around is a day I spend," Caleb said. "I only got so many. I'll not spend one on being curious." "You don't want to look at him." "Ma'am, I want to look at him worse than I want that plate of beans." On the 9th day, Rance Coyle came back, and he did not come alone, and he did not come to ride. He came with a thin, careful man in a town coat who introduced himself as the deputy stock inspector for the district and who stood at the gate reading off a paper while Coyle sat his horse behind him with his wrists crossed on the horn. "Mrs. Carter, a complaint's been sworn regarding a dangerous stud running loose in this district." "He isn't loose. He's in a corral. You're looking at it." "Complaint says the fence has been broke on 4 occasions." "Who swore it?" "Ma'am, I'm not obliged." "Coyle swore it," Abigail said. "He's sitting right there. He swore a complaint about a fence he broke a board off of himself when he threw a war bridle at it." Coyle smiled at the middle distance. The inspector cleared his throat. "There's a statute regarding stallions 2 years and older not adequately confined. There's a penalty of $10, and there's a provision, ma'am, whereby the animal may be ordered destroyed by the county at the owner's expense." Abigail felt the ground move a little under her. At my expense. Yes, ma'am, $4. You'd shoot my horse and charge me $4 for the bullet. That's the statute, ma'am, I don't write 'em. When? There'd be a hearing, 30 days thereabouts. 30 days. She had 42 left with the bank. She did the arithmetic standing right there, and it came out the same way it always came out. Caleb had gotten up off the ground. He came over, slow hat in his hand, and he was polite about it in a way that made Coyle sit up straighter. Sir, that statute say anything about fence height? It says adequate confinement. Then adequate is a thing a man decides, and different men decide different. Caleb looked at the corral. I'll have 8 foot of plank on the west and north by Thursday, and I'll have a gate a bear couldn't work. Would that satisfy the county? That'd be for the hearing to say. Yes, sir. But would it satisfy you personally standing here? The inspector shifted. He was not a bad man. He was a man with a job and a boss and a horse to feed like everybody else. It'd satisfy me, he said. Then I'd take it kindly if you'd write that down on your paper, sir, and sign your name under it on account of 30 days is a long time for a memory. The inspector wrote it down. He signed his name. He touched his hat to Abigail and rode off, and Rance Coyle sat there another moment. 8 foot of plank, Coyle said. That's what $40 of lumber. Somewhere thereabouts. You got $40 drifter? No, sir. She got $40? Caleb put his hat on. Mr. Coyle, he said. I got a question, and I've had it 9 days, and I'd sooner ask it than carry it. When you laid that quirt across his face, how'd you know he wouldn't come apart? Coyle's expression didn't change. Any man would have guessed he'd come apart, Caleb went on. You didn't guess. You hit him a second time before he'd finished standing still, and a man don't do that unless he already knows what the horse is fixin' to do. He let that sit. How'd you know? You're a nervy son of a gun. I've been told. Coyle turned his horse. Fence'll fall down, he said. They always do. And he rode out, and Caleb Walker stood at that gate, watching him go with an expression Abigail had not seen on him before and did not know how to read, and when she asked him about it, he said only, Ma'am, do you know where that horse come out of before the Judith Basin? A freight outfit. Daniel said a freight outfit. Whose? I don't know. Does it matter? It might. He built the fence with lumber. Had he done, advanced him against nothing at all, which she wrote in her book as W. 4160. See me, and he built it alone in 4 days in 90-degree heat, and on the second of those days, Abigail came out at noon and found him sitting in the shade of the half-built wall with his shirt soaked through and his hands shaking too bad to hold the water dipper. Mr. Walker. I'm all right. Your hands are shaking. They do that. He got the dipper up with both of them and drank. Since the war, comes and goes. She sat down on a stack of planks about 6 feet away, which was the closest she had voluntarily sat to a man since April of '75, and she did not think about that until much later. What did you do in it? Scouted. 3rd year on I got put to the remount service, which is a fancy way of saying I bought horses and I broke horses and I give horses to boys who didn't know one end from the other, and I wrote down how many come back. He set the dipper on his knee. 1,206 went out of my hands, ma'am. That's a real number. I kept it in a book. Somewhere around 300 come back. That's not your doing. No, ma'am, but I signed for 'em. Mr. Walker, I ain't fishing for comfort. I'm answering your question. He looked out at the pen. There was a mare I had. Nothing special, a little bay, she'd follow me like a dog. And I give her to a lieutenant out of Ohio who was 20 years old and scared out of his mind. And I told him she'd take care of him, which she did, because they found him under her 4 months later at a place I won't name, and she was still standing over him with her leg broke in 2 places. He was quiet. So I went and did what you do. And that was the last horse I ever handled for 11 months on account of I decided I'd stop being the man who hands 'em to people. Abigail didn't say anything. Then the war quit, Caleb said, and it turned out I didn't know how to be anything else. So you drift. I drift. And you sit outside fences. Yes'm. Why? Caleb Walker rubbed his palms together slow to make them stop. Because a horse can't tell you what happened to him, he said. He can only show you over and over, and everybody who watches him calls it a bad temper. And I have got a good deal of experience, ma'am, in being a thing that can't say what happened to it. He stood up. Anyhow, fence won't build itself. On the 12th day, the stallion came to 8 feet. Caleb was sitting with his back against the new plank, and he heard him come, and he did not move so much as a finger, and the horse stood there behind him for 11 minutes. By the watch, Abigail held on the porch, close enough that his breath moved the man's shirt collar. Then he blew out hard one time and walked away. Caleb sat there another half hour before he got up, and when he came to the porch, his face was wet, and he did not pretend otherwise. Ma'am. I saw. He smelled the back of my head. Is that good? Ma'am, Caleb said, that's a horse deciding I ain't got a rope hit on me. That's the best thing that's happened to me in 4 years, and I'd be obliged if I could sit down before my knees go. She brought him coffee, and they sat on the steps, and for a while neither of them said anything at all, and that was the first evening of it, the sitting on the steps, which afterward became the shape of every day. Then, on the 14th day, Samuel Whitaker came back and put an end to arithmetic. He came alone. He came up the steps this time, which he had not done before, and he took his hat off and held it against his chest, and he said, Abigail, I've done a thing, and I'd rather you heard it from me on your own porch than off a paper in the mail. Say it. I bought your note. She heard it. She understood the words individually, and it took her a moment to put them in a row. You what? I bought the paper from the bank in Helena. $2,400, and I paid a premium on it, which they were glad to take, because a widow's note with a stud horse for collateral is not a thing a board of directors sleeps well beside. He turned his hat once. I own your debt. Not Elias Bram. Me. You can't. Ma'am, it's the commonest transaction in the territory. You bought my husband's ranch out from under me. I bought a note, Whitaker said. The ranch is still yours. That's the truth of it, and I'd ask you to hold on to the truth of it, because I know how this'll get told in town. Abigail put her hand on the porch post. What happens on the 60th day? Same as before. No, it isn't. Bram had a board. Bram had to answer to men in Helena. She heard her own voice going up and could not stop it. You answer to nobody, Mr. Whitaker. You can call that note any morning you feel like it. I could. Will you? Whitaker looked at her for a long moment. No, he said. Why should I believe that? Because I'll write it, he said. Right now on your table in my hand, that the note comes due the 22nd of September, and not one day before, and I'll have Jed Pyle printed in his newspaper, so every soul in this county holds me to it. He put his hat back on. I am not a wicked man, Abigail. I'm a patient one. There's a difference, and it is the whole difference, and you'll grant it to me one of these days when you're not so tired. Then why buy it at all? Because on the 22nd of September, Samuel Whitaker said gently, I would like the man who takes this place off you to be somebody who'll let you keep your husband's grave on that hill and put a fence around it. Bram would have sold it to a sheep outfit out of Miles City, and they would have run wool over Daniel Carter's headstone by Christmas. He went down one step. You may hate me. Most folks work out a way to. But I'd have you hate me for the right things. He got in his buggy and drove off, and Abigail Carter stood on her own porch and could not for the life of her decide what had just been done to her. Caleb had heard it from the corner of the house. He came around, and he did not say anything for a while. Say it, she said. He meant it. I know he meant it. That's what's wrong with it. Yes'm. If he'd been cruel, I'd know what to do. She wiped her face with the back of her wrist, angry about it. How do you fight a man who's sorry for you? You don't, Caleb said. You just don't lose. That is a very easy thing to say. It ain't easy at all, ma'am. It's the hardest sentence I know. That night, she couldn't sleep, and she came out at some hour past 2, and Caleb was still at the fence in the dark, and she stood at the corner of the barn and did not go closer because he was talking. He was talking to the horse. Ain't got a thing for you, he was saying. No feed, no rope, no reason. I sat here all day, and I'll sit here tomorrow, and there ain't a thing in it for either one of us, and that's the whole of my offer, so. Quiet. Yeah, Caleb said. I know. She went back inside and sat at the kitchen table in the dark for an hour. On the 17th, everything sped up at once. It started with Jed Pyle riding out from town before breakfast with a paper folded in his coat and his face the color of dough. Mrs. Carter, I'd not have printed it if I'd known where it come from. Printed what? He handed it over. It was a notice 2 columns, and it announced that on account of public interest, Mr. Samuel Whitaker had authorized the purchase of the stallion known as Midnight Crown for $40, said animal to be humanely destroyed following the county hearing, and that Mr. Whitaker wished the public to know he took no pleasure in it and considered it a mercy. Abigail read it twice. He never bought that horse. No, ma'am. He can't buy a horse I haven't sold. No, ma'am, he can't, and that's why I wrote out. Jed took his hat off. It come to my counter Tuesday with the money already paid, and Coyle's signature on the copy, and I never looked past the money, and I have been in the newspaper business 19 years, and I'd like to say I'd never done that before, and I can't. He swallowed. It's on 200 copies. It's in the Antler. It's in Miles City by now. Caleb came around the barn with a hammer still in his hand. Read me the words. Jed read them. Say the last part again. Humanely destroyed following the county hearing. Caleb stood there. Ma'am, he said, that ain't aimed at the horse. What? Nobody prints 200 copies to kill a horse. You kill a horse behind a barn on a Tuesday, and nobody prints anything. He set the hammer down on the rail very carefully. That's aimed at buyers. That's a notice that says the black stud is already dead. Don't come here. Don't bid. There ain't nothing at Willow Creek worth the drive. Abigail's hands went cold. The demonstration. Yes'm. He's killing it before I hold it. He's killing the price of it, Caleb said, which is the same thing done politer. Jed Pyle looked between the two of them. Mrs. Carter, I'll print a correction Thursday. Free. Whole front page if you want it. How many will read a correction? Fewer, ma'am. Then print it anyway, Abigail said. And Jed. Ma'am. Whose freight outfit was that stallion out of before the basin? You'd have printed the shipping notices, Jed thought. Bickle and Sons, out of Fort Benton. They quit in 73. Caleb Walker went very still. Say that name again. Bickle and Sons. Who broke for 'em? Sir. Who was their rough string man? A freight outfit that size runs 60-80 head. They'd have a man. Jed frowned. There was a fella. Hard case. He hired on to Whitaker after Bickle went under. That'd be 74. Nobody said anything for a second. Coyle, Abigail said. Coyle, Jed agreed. Caleb Walker turned around and looked out at the corral, and Abigail watched a thing come up in that quiet man's face that she had not believed was in him, and it went away again almost as fast, and she was glad it did. 9 days, Caleb said. 9 days I've been asking myself how he knew. Mr. Walker, I wasn't testing that horse, ma'am. His voice had gone flat and low. He wasn't riding him for $100, and he wasn't proving nothing to that crowd. He was showing him. He got up on that horse, and he laid a quirt across his face so that horse would know exactly who had come back. Abigail sat down on the porch step because her legs did it without asking. He froze, she said. Yes'm. He didn't freeze from pain. He froze because he knew him. He knew his hands, Caleb said. A horse don't remember faces the way you do. He remembers hands, and he remembers a voice, and Rance Coyle got up on that animal and put his hands where they used to go, and that horse went back 4 years in 1 second, and he did the only thing that ever worked. He quit moving, and he waited for it to be over. Jed Pyle said quietly, Sweet Lord. Abigail put both hands over her mouth. Daniel, she said. Daniel used to say, he didn't flinch when you raised your hand. He flinched when you smiled. That's right. Because the man smiled. That's right, ma'am, Caleb said. She got up and walked out into the yard and stood there with her back to both of them for a good while, and neither man went after her. And Jed Pyle got on his horse and rode back to town with his correction to write, and afterward he told people he had never in his life been so glad to leave a place he was welcome. On the 18th day, Abigail Carter went into the corral in daylight. Caleb came off the ground fast. "Ma'am, he's never touched me. That ain't the same as—" "I know what it isn't." She kept walking. "Stay where you are." He stayed where he was which she thought about for a long time afterward, because there was not another man in that county who would have. She stopped in the middle of the pen and the stallion came around the north side at a jog with his head up, and then slowed and then stopped 3 feet out. Always 3 feet. That wall only he could see. "I know now," she said. He blew out. "I know what they did to you, and I know who did it, and I know he's sitting on 40,000 acres 11 miles from here with a job and a good hat." Her voice broke on hat of all the words in the sentence. "And I have been standing at that rail for 16 months calling you the ruin of my life." The horse's ear went sideways. "You were the only one who saw it," she said. "Daniel, he was the only one. Everybody told me he was a fool, and I let them tell me for 16 months, and I never once said different out loud. And I want you to know that I'm ashamed of it. And I know you don't know what shame is, and I have got nobody else left to say it to." She held her hand out. 3 feet. 2.5. 2. He didn't cross it. But he stretched his neck out as far as it would go, all the way out, until his muzzle was maybe 4 inches from her palm. And he stood there straining toward her hand, without moving his feet. And Abigail Carter stood in the middle of that corral and cried without a sound. "He wants to," Caleb said from the rail, very quiet. "Ma'am, look at his feet. He wants to. Something's got a hold of him." "What?" The last hand he took at that distance. The stallion pulled his head back and turned and walked off, and Abigail came out through the gate and got about 10 feet before her legs quit, and Caleb Walker caught her under the elbow and held her up and let go. The instant she was steady, and stepped back and put his hat on. "I'm all right." "Yes'm." "I said I'm all right." "I heard you, ma'am. I ain't arguing." She laughed, which surprised them both. It came out wrecked and wet, and it was the first one out of her in 16 months, and she had to put her hand over her mouth to stop it turning into the other thing. "Mr. Walker." "Ma'am." 38 days. "I know it. Can you do it in 38 days? Caleb Walker looked out at the pen a long while. "No," he said. She turned on him. "Then what have we been—" "I can't do it in 38 days, he said. "But he can. And he's been moving faster this week than any horse I ever handled in my life. And if you ask me why, ma'am, I'll tell you honest, it's because he ain't learning me. He's remembering that there's such a thing as a person who don't want nothing. He had one of them once, and he lost him in a creek in April of '75. And there's a piece of that animal that has been standing in that pen for 16 months, waiting for your husband to come back and finish his breakfast." Abigail put her hand flat on the fence rail. "Don't. You asked me why he never touched you. Don't say it. Because you're the one that man came back to every night," Caleb said. "Ma'am, that horse has never once in 16 months hurt the only other creature on this place that's grieving." She stood there, and she did not cry that time. She had gone past it into something quieter and harder that felt for the first time since the water took him like the floor of a thing instead of the falling. "All right," she said. "Ma'am, all right, we'll do the demonstration. 20th of September, 2 days before the note. I'll write to every breeder from here to Cheyenne, and I'll pay Jed to print the invitations, and I'll stand up in front of the whole county and dare them to come look at a horse. Samuel Whitaker already told them was dead." She wiped her face with her sleeve. "And if it fails, I will lose this place in front of 400 people instead of quietly. And I have thought about that, Mr. Walker, and I find I would rather lose it loud." Caleb Walker looked at her. "Yes, ma'am," he said, and there was something in the way he said it that she carried around for days without ever once being able to name. They worked 19 hours a day after that. Howe was at the fence at 4 in the morning, and he watered stock and mended wire and doctored a foundered mare. And never once in all that time went into the corral. Not one step, and the stallion came to 6 feet, and then 4, and then on the 23rd day stood beside him at the rail for 40 minutes while Caleb ate his dinner sitting on an upturned bucket. The same bucket. She found him on it and didn't say a word about whose it had been. He knew. She could tell by the way he sat down on it, careful like a man sitting in a church pew that belonged to a family. The invitations went out on the 25th day, 60 of them, and Abigail signed every one by hand and put in each envelope a line that she wrote out 60 separate times because Jed said it would cost extra to set. "You have been told this horse is dead. Come and see." On the 29th day, 2 breeders wrote back and said they'd come. On the 31st day, 9 more did. On the 33rd day, Hattie Dunn drove out and put the Antlers betting book on the kitchen table and said, "It's not on how long he lasts anymore." "What's it on?" "Whether the horse gets ridden by the 20th. Even money as of Tuesday. It was 40-1 in August." Hattie sat down heavy. "There's men in that saloon, Abby, that has never done one generous thing in their lives, and they are putting $1 down on a widow, and half of them couldn't tell you why." "And the other half?" "The other half," Hattie said, "seen Rance Coyle hit that animal in the face and has not been able to get right about it since." On the 35th day, the stallion took a handful of grain off Caleb Walker's flat palm, and the man stood there with his eyes shut and his arm out and did not move for a full minute after the grain was gone. On the 36th day, Abigail woke up before dawn because there was no sound at all. That was what got her out of the bed. Not a noise. The absence of one. For 16 months, she had slept through a black stallion moving in a corral 80 feet from her window, and a body learns a sound so well, it hears the hole where it should be. She went out in her nightdress. The gate was standing open. Not broke. Not knocked down. Open swung wide, and the chain lying in the dirt with 2 links cut through clean. The way a chain is cut by a man who has brought a cold chisel out to a ranch in the dark on purpose. "Mr. Walker." She heard herself say it small. "Mr. Walker." He came out of the barn at a dead run with his shirt half on and stopped at the gate and looked at the chain and did not touch it. "Don't walk there," he said. "Don't walk there, ma'am. There's tracks." "He's gone. He's gone. He's—" "Boot heel and a mule shoe on the near hind, and they come in from the creek so as not to raise the dogs." Caleb crouched down. "He didn't run off. He was let out." "Then we'll find him. We'll get horses. We'll—" "Ma'am." 16 days. We have got 16 days. Abigail. He had never once used her name, and it stopped her the way a hand on the shoulder would have. Caleb Walker stood up out of that dirt with the cut chain hanging off 2 fingers, and his face gone gray as ash. "He run north," he said. "There's 180,000 acres of open range north of that creek, and every foot of it is Whitaker's, and in this territory, ma'am, a loose stud on another man's range can be shot legal by any hand that finds him, and there ain't a court between here and Helena that'd call it a crime." The words landed, and Abigail did not answer them. She went in the house barefoot and came back out with Daniel's rifle and a box of shells, and Caleb Walker put himself in the doorway of the barn between her and the saddles. "Ma'am." "Move. Give me the gun." "He's got 16 days of my life running loose on another man's grass, and you want the gun." "I want you alive at supper," Caleb said. "You ride onto Whitaker Range at daylight with a rifle across your knees, and you are not a widow looking for a horse anymore. You're a woman hunting men, and every hand on that outfit will be inside the law when they answer it." He held his hand out flat. "Give it here." "You don't give me orders on my own place." "No, ma'am, I don't." He didn't lower the hand. "I'm asking. That's all I ever done here." She stood there breathing hard for 4 or 5 seconds, and then she put the rifle in his hand and hated herself for the relief of it. Caleb set it inside the barn door and had the gray saddled in 90 seconds, and Abigail took the sorrel because he was the fastest thing left on the place, and they were at the gate when Hattie Dunn's buckboard came up the road at a trot with the old mare lathered. "Abby." "I know. You don't know a thing yet. 4 riders come through town going north at midnight. Hattie hauled up. "I know it because Loomis's dogs went off, and I got up and I counted 'em out my window, and one of 'em had a rifle scabbard hung off the wrong side, and there's only one man in this county carries left because he can't work his hand." Caleb's head came around. "Say that again, ma'am." "Rance Coyle can't grip with his left. Hasn't in 4 years. He'll tell you he took a fall." "He didn't take a fall," Caleb said. "How would you know?" "Because I've seen a hand that a horse got hold of, and so has every man who ever worked a rough string, and it don't look like a fall." He gathered his reins. Mrs. Dunn, ride to Jed Pyle and tell him what you told me and tell him to write down the hour. Why the hour? 'Cause if this ends wrong, ma'am, the hour is the only thing anybody's going to argue about. They went north at a long trot, and neither of them said one word for 4 miles. And at the Whitaker gate, 2 of his hands came out to meet them, and Abigail rode straight through the middle of them without slowing. She went up those steps with her hair down her back and mud to the knee of her nightdress skirt under Daniel's old coat, and she hit Samuel Whitaker's door with the flat of her hand hard enough to rattle the frame. He opened it in his shirt sleeves with a razor in his hand and half his face still lathered. Abigail. Where is he? Where is who? Don't. Her voice cracked straight down the middle. Don't you stand there with soap on your face and ask me who. Somebody cut my gate chain with a chisel in the dark and put my husband's horse on your range, and there is a printed notice in 200 saloons that says you already paid $40 for him. And if you tell me that's coincidence, I will come in that house after you, sir. I swear before God I will. Samuel Whitaker did not move for a long moment. Then he said quietly, "Say the part about the chain again." It was cut. Cut. 2 links. Clean. Whitaker set the razor down on the little table by the door, and Abigail watched a man's face go through 4 or 5 different things in about 2 seconds and settle on one. She had not expected and did not want, because it made everything harder. He believed her. "I did not order that," he said. "Your foreman. I did not order that, ma'am, and if you'll grant me 90 seconds, I'll prove it to you in a way that costs me something, which is the only kind of proof worth having." He turned his head and shouted into the house, "Emmett! Emmett, get up and get the book." A young man came stumbling out with a ledger under his arm and his suspenders down. "Read me the last 4 entries." "Sir." "Read them." The boy read. 2 entries for hay, 1 for a wagon tongue, and the last one dated the day before $40 out to R. Coyle marked stock purchase per instruction. "Whose instruction?" Whitaker said. "Yours, sir." "Did I write it?" The boy looked at the page and went white. "No, sir. That's Mr. Coyle's hand." Nobody said anything. "He signed my money out of my own book," Whitaker said, "and he put my name in a newspaper to do a thing I'd have hanged a man for suggesting to my face." He looked at Abigail. "Ma'am, I have wanted your water for 2 years, and I have made you offers you found insulting, and I'll not pretend otherwise. But I have never in 31 years in this business cut a woman's gate at night, and I would ask you to look at me and decide whether you believe that, because I don't intend to say it twice." Abigail looked at him. "I believe you," she said. "God help me." "Then get out of my doorway and let me get my boots." "You're coming." "Ma'am, my name is on it." He was already turning. "Emmett, get the bay and get Sutter and Reyes and nobody else. And bring me a paper and a pen out here first, because I'm going to write a thing down before I leave this porch, and I want 3 men to watch me do it." He wrote it on the porch rail standing up, and he read it out loud while he wrote, and what it said was that no hand in the employ of Samuel Whitaker was to discharge a firearm at the Black Stallion known as Midnight Crown under any circumstance whatsoever, that the animal was the sole property of Mrs. Abigail Carter of Willow Creek, and that any man who violated it was discharged as of that hour and would answer for it as a private citizen. He signed it and handed it to Caleb Walker. "You keep that, mister, not her, you." "Why me, sir?" "Because if it comes to a rifle out there, I expect you'll be the one standing in front of it," Whitaker said, "and a man ought to have something in his pocket worth reading over him." They rode out 8 strong before the sun cleared the ridge. It was Emmett, the boy with the ledger, who found the first thing, and he found it because he was 17 and scared and looking at the ground instead of the country. "Mr. Whitaker, sir, there's mule tracks." "There's mule tracks all over this territory." "No, sir, there's a mule and 4 horses in company, and they come up out of the creek, and they didn't take the road." The boy swallowed. "And sir, there's a man been walking, leading, about a mile of it." Caleb got down and looked and stayed down a long time. "He led him," he said. "Led him how?" Abigail said. "Nobody can lead him. He can." Caleb stood up. "Ma'am, that horse followed him a mile out of your corral in the dark on a lead rope. He didn't fight it. He didn't set back. Look at the ground, there ain't a single mark of an animal that pulled." He put his hat back on, and his voice was not steady. He went with him. Why would he go with him? Same reason he stood still and took the quirt. Caleb swung up. He's done it before. 4 years of doing what that man says is what kept him alive, and a horse don't unlearn that in 19 days sitting next to me. They hit the wire at 9:30. It was a drift fence. Whitaker had run across the head of a coulee 2 summers back, 3 strands, and there was hair on the top wire and there was blood on the second, and Abigail got down off the sorrel and stood there with her hand on the post and could not make herself go closer. Is that? That's him. Is it bad? Ma'am, I don't know yet. Mr. Walker, is it bad? Caleb ran 2 fingers along the wire and looked at what came off them. He went through it standing, he said, not running. If he'd been running, there'd be a great deal more of this, and there'd be a post down. He wiped his hand on his thigh. Somebody put him through that wire on purpose on the near side so the cut'd be legal looking. A stud that jumps a drift fence onto open range is a stud that can be shot, and there's the story, and there's the wire to prove it. Whitaker rode up. Which way from here? Down the coulee. They pushed him down where he can't get out. There's no water in that coulee. No, sir, there ain't a thing in that coulee but walls, Caleb said, which is the point of it. They came on Rance Coil a little after 10, 3/4 of a mile down, and he had 2 men with him and a third one holding horses back at the mouth, and the black stallion was standing at the closed end with his head low and his near hind dark to the hock. Coil had his rifle out of the scabbard. He was not pointing it. He was holding it across his body muzzle down, the way a man holds a thing he has already decided about. That's far enough. Whitaker rode past him without stopping and turned his horse crossways in front of the rifle. Rance. Mr. Whitaker? Put it up. Sir, that's a loose stud on your grass, and there's a complaint sworn, and a county order pending, and I am inside every law there is. Coil didn't move. You know it, and I know it, and so does she. Put it up, Rance. You paid $40 for this animal. I did not. It's in the book, in your hand, Whitaker said, over my name, and you and I are going to have a conversation about that in front of a judge before the leaves turn. But not this minute. This minute you're going to put that rifle up because I am telling you to, and 31 years ought to be worth 1 sentence. Coil looked at him a long moment. Then he laughed, and it was an ugly sound, and Abigail heard something come loose in it. 31 years, Coil said. Sir, you never once asked me a question in 6 of 'em. Not one. You told me what you wanted, and you looked out the window while I got it, and every single thing this outfit owns come out of somebody's bad year, and you have got the finest manners of any man I ever stole for. That's true, Whitaker said. Put it up anyway. And then Caleb Walker got down off the gray, and he did it slow, and he handed his reins to the boy Emmett without looking at him, and he walked out into the middle of that coulee with nothing in his hands at all. Coil. Don't. I want to ask you my question. You take one more step, Drifter. You worked the rough string for Bickle & Sons out of Fort Benton, 71 to 73. Caleb kept walking easy, no hurry in him anywhere. He come to you at 3-year-old off the reservation range, and he wouldn't drive. That's what a freight outfit needs, ain't it, a horse that'll drive? And he wouldn't. Stop walking. And you got him in a chain twitch one day, because that's what a man does when he's out of patience, and there's 80 head behind him. And he come off the ground with you on the end of it. Caleb stopped about 30 feet out. How long till you could use that hand? Coil's jaw worked. I never could, he said. No, sir, I didn't figure. 14 months I couldn't hold a rein. 14 months. You know what a rough string man is worth with one hand, mister. Coil's voice had climbed. Bickle put me on a wagon seat. 32 years old and hauling flour. And then you went back in the pen after him. I did. With a knife. Nobody in that coulee made a sound. There's a white seam across his flank about 18 inches long, Caleb said, and it never got sewed, and it's the wrong shape for wire and the wrong shape for a post, and there's only one thing left it can be. I've known it since the first day I sat down at that fence. I just didn't know whose hand. He was quiet a second. I'd about decided I'd carry it and never say it in front of a lady, but you cut her gait. Coyle brought the rifle up. He brought it up fast, and he brought it up on Caleb Walker, and not on the horse. And Abigail Carter heard a sound come out of her own mouth that she never afterward recognized as hers. And Whitaker started his horse forward, and Emmett shouted something, and none of it mattered, because it was all going to happen inside about 2 seconds. And it was the stallion who ended it. He came up out of the closed end of that coulee at a run with a bad leg under him, and he did not go at Coyle, and he did not go at the horses, and he did not go at the mouth of the draw, where the open country was. He went to Caleb Walker. He came the whole length of it, and he broke down to a trot, and then a walk, and he put himself square in front of that man's shoulder on between him and the rifle, and he stopped. 3 feet. Then he crossed it. He put his head down over Caleb's shoulder, and stood there with his sides heaving, and his muzzle against the man's back. And Caleb Walker raised his right hand, very slow, and laid it flat on that black neck, and the horse did not move. 19 days. Nobody breathed. Rance, Whitaker said into the quiet, "Look at what you're pointing that at." Coyle's arms were shaking. "He don't do that," he said. "He don't do that. I had him 3 years. "You had him 3 years," Caleb said, "and he never come to you one time, and that's been eating you alive for 4. Shut your mouth. You wasn't going to shoot the horse today." Caleb had not turned around. He had his hand on that neck and his back to a rifle, and he spoke like a man across a supper table. "You could have done that at the gate in the dark and been in your bunk by 2. You walked him 11 miles and put him through wire and stood him in a hole in the ground where he couldn't get out. And then you waited for us, and you waited 3 hours, and don't tell me you didn't, because your horses are cold." He stopped. "You wanted somebody to see him one more time before you did it. You wanted us to watch." Coyle's face came apart. "He should have killed me," he said. Abigail said, "What?" "That day, in the chain." Coyle was looking at the horse, and not at any of them. "He had me down, and he had a leg over me, and he had every right, ma'am. He had every right there is, and he stepped off. He stepped over me, and he walked to the far rail, and he stood there." The rifle barrel came down about a foot. 32 years old, and I'm laying in the dirt with my hand ruined, and my life gone, and a horse decided not to. And I've had to be a man that a horse forgave, every day since. "So you cut him," Abigail said. "So I cut him. And then you came to my ranch and got on his back and hit him in the face in front of 40 people. Coyle didn't answer. "Say it out loud, Mr. Coyle. Say it where they can hear it." "I wanted him to fight," Coyle said. "I wanted him to come apart in front of the whole county so they'd all see what I seen, so it'd be the horse's fault and not mine, so there'd be one damn person in Montana Territory who understood." His voice broke on it. And he stood there. He stood there and took it and looked at me like he knew me. 16 months that woman's had him, and he's put 11 men down, and he never once come at her, and I could not for the life of me work out why him and me was the only two that couldn't be forgiven, and then I figured it out. "Figured what out?" "He ain't mean," Rance Coyle said. "I am." The rifle went down into the dirt. He didn't set it down. He opened his hand and let it fall, and he stood there in front of 8 people with his ruined left hand hanging, and nothing at all left in his face, and Samuel Whitaker got off his horse and picked the rifle up out of the grass. "You're done, Rance." "Yes, sir." Sutter Reyes ride him to town, and put him in front of Jed Pyle, and let him say every word of that again with a pencil going, and then take him to the sheriff, and let him say it a 3rd time. Whitaker levered the shells out into his palm one at a time. "And Rance." "Sir." "I'll pay for your lawyer." Coyle stared at him. "Not because you've earned it," Whitaker said. "Because I hired you in 74, and I never once asked you where your hand went. And I have been thinking for the last 10 minutes about what kind of a man doesn't ask, and I don't care for the answer." They took him out of the coulee, and Abigail Carter never saw him again in her life. Caleb was on his knees at the stallion's hind leg before the horses were out of sight. "Ma'am, I need your hands." She was already down there. "Tell me." "Hold him. Not the halter, there ain't one. Just stand at his head and be where he can see you." He had the leg in both hands. "There's 3 cuts. 2 don't signify. The 3rd one's high on the hock, and it's laid open, and there's dirt in it, and it's been 8 hours. "Is it?" "It ain't a tendon." Abigail put her hand over her mouth. It ain't a tendon, ma'am, breathe. Caleb didn't look up. Emmett, I want that canteen, and I want a clean shirt, and I don't care whose. They cleaned it there in the bottom of the draw, with 4 men holding nothing at all, because there was nothing to hold him with. He had come out of that corral on a lead rope in the dark, and Coyle had taken the rope with him, and so the black stallion who had put 11 men on the ground in 16 months stood loose in open country with his leg in a stranger's hands and never offered to move. He's letting you, Abigail said. Yes'm. Mr. Walker, he's letting you. I know it. Caleb's voice was thick. I'd be obliged if you'd not say it again for a minute, ma'am. I've got work to do here, and I ain't in a fit state. They walked him home. 11 miles. No rope, no halter, no lead. Caleb Walker got down off the gray and gave him to Emmett and started up out of that coulee on his own 2 feet, and the stallion came behind him at a walk with a bandaged hock and stayed behind him, and when Caleb stopped, the horse stopped, and when Caleb went on, the horse went on. They were 4 hours doing it. At the 2nd hour, Abigail rode up alongside him, and neither of them spoke for a while. You could ride, she said. He'd follow the gray. I want him following me. Your boots are done for. They was done for in Bozeman. She looked ahead down the road. Mr. Walker, why'd you walk out in front of that rifle? 'Cause he wasn't going to shoot me. You didn't know that. No, ma'am, Caleb said. I didn't. They came through the edge of Willow Creek at 4 in the afternoon on a Thursday, and Abigail had not thought about the town at all, and so it was a shock to her when they rounded the last bend and there were people standing in the road. Word had beaten them in by 2 hours. Hattie Dunn had done it, and Jed Pyle had done the rest, and there were maybe 80 people out in front of the Antler and the Mercantile and the church, and not one of them said a word. A man took his hat off. Then another one did. Then a woman near the church picked up her little girl so she could see over the crowd, and the whole street stood there, hats in hand, and watched a drifter in ruined boots walk a black stallion down the middle of it with no rope on him at all. Somebody at the back said, "Sweet Jesus, he's just walking behind him." Somebody else said, "Shut up, Ed." Abigail Carter rode through her own town with tears coming down her face, and did not wipe them off because she had spent 16 months keeping her chin level in front of these exact people, and she found she was finished with it. Old Tom Ratliff was standing outside the Antler with his collarbone long since knitted crooked, and as they passed he said not loud, "Ma'am." "Mr. Ratliff." "Your husband was right," he said. "You tell him I said so." They got home at 6:30. Caleb put him in the box stall. Daniel had built and stood at the door with his arms over the top board and did not come out for a long time, and Abigail brought him coffee, and he took it and set it down and didn't drink it. 9 days, she said. "Yes'm. 9 days to the demonstration. 60 men wrote back Mr. Walker, 61 counting the one from Cheyenne that came Tuesday." She was almost laughing with it. "He came to you. In front of Samuel Whitaker and 6 of his men, he came to you, and he put his head on your shoulder, and there is not a soul in this county now who'll say that horse can't be handled." Caleb didn't answer. "Say something." "Ma'am?" "Say something, please. You've not said a word in an hour." Caleb Walker turned around, and he had that look on him that she'd seen once before out at the fence the day Jed Pyle read the notice out loud. "I got the wrap off him just now," he said, "to look at it again in the light. And it's swelled to twice the size it was at noon." Abigail set the cup down on the rail very carefully, the way you set something down, when your hands are not steady and you don't want anyone to know. "How long?" she said. "Ma'am." "How long, Mr. Walker? For a hawk like that to come sound enough to carry a man?" Caleb Walker looked back into that stall at the only thing standing between Abigail Carter and a courthouse step. 3 weeks, he said. "If we're lucky. And she comes due in 11. Doc Ames came out from Willow Creek the next morning, and he was in that stall 4 minutes before he came out again and wiped his hands on a rag he'd brought himself. "Mrs. Carter?" "Say it plain. Plain as he's got heat in that joint, and a wound 8 inches long that laid open in dirt for the better part of a day. And I've seen 4 of those in my life, and I buried 3 of 'em. He handed the rag to Caleb without looking at him. I'm not being cruel. You asked plain. What's the fourth one do? The fourth one had a man who didn't sleep. Caleb said, then I won't sleep. Ames looked at him a moment. You'll want carbolic, and you'll want it weak. Not strong. Strong'll kill the flesh worse than the dirt did. Flush it 4 times a day, and don't you dare wrap it tight. And mister, if he goes down and stays down. He won't. If he does. Then I'll come get you, Caleb said, and you'll bring the other thing in your bag, and I'll hold his head. They flushed it at 6 and at 11 and at 4 and at 9. And Abigail carried water from the well until her shoulders wouldn't lift. And on the second night, the fever came up in him so hard she could feel it standing 3 feet away. He's hot. I know it. Mr. Walker, he's hot like a stove. I know it, ma'am. Caleb had not been out of that stall in 30 hours except to change the water. He'd taken his hat off somewhere and never picked it back up. And Abigail realized she had never once in 19 days seen the top of that man's head in daylight. You have to eat. Directly. You said directly at noon, ma'am. He looked up at her from the floor of that stall with his sleeves rolled and his forearms wet to the elbow. If I get up and walk to that kitchen, I'll be gone 6 minutes. In 4 years of the remount service, I never once had 6 minutes that a horse didn't die in. That ain't sense. I know it ain't sense. But I ain't got it in me tonight to test it. Abigail Carter went to the house and came back with a plate, and sat down in the straw beside him and held it while he ate, and neither of them said a word about it, then or ever. On the 3rd morning, the black stallion went down. She heard it from the kitchen, a great hollow thud through the barn wall, and she was out the door before the plate hit the table. Caleb was already on his knees at the horse's head with both hands under his jaw. Up. Up now. Nothing. Ma'am, get behind his back and put your knee in and push when I say. He's too heavy. He don't need lifting, he needs believing. Caleb had his mouth about 6 inches from that ear. Get up, you hear me? You walked 11 miles yesterday on that leg, and you never asked me for one thing. Get up. The horse's eye rolled. 9 days he's got. 9 days, and there's 60 men riding out here from 4 territories to look at you, and every one of 'em's been told you're already dead. Caleb's voice broke in the middle. Don't you make 'em right. Don't you dare make 'em right. Mr. Walker. Push, ma'am. She pushed. He came up in 3 tries. Front end. First the way they do, and he came up shaking, and stood there with his head down at his knees. And Caleb Walker put his forehead against that black neck and stayed there a long moment where nobody could see his face. Is that the worst of it? No, ma'am, he said. That's the 2nd day of 6. The town came on the 4th. She didn't ask them, and she'd have died before she did. Tom Ratliff drove up at 7 in the morning with 2 milk cans of water in the wagon bed and his crooked collarbone, and no explanation. Mr. Ratliff? Ma'am, where do you want 'em? I don't. Yes'm, I heard you. He set them down by the barn door. I'll be back at 4 with 2 more. Webb Sawyer came at noon and stood in the yard, turning his hat over. Mrs. Carter, I don't reckon I'm welcome. You put a running W on that horse in June. I did. Then why are you here? Because I've thought about it every day since. Webb Sawyer said, and I'd sooner haul water for a week than think about it another year. 2 elk came on the 5th day with a woman named Sarah, who knew more about a poultice than Doc Ames did, and had never once been asked, and she made one out of flax and something else she didn't name, and the heat in that hock was down by half in 11 hours. How'd you know to come? Abigail asked her. Everyone knows. How? 2 elk said, Ma'am, 100 people watched that man walk him down the main street of your town with no rope on him. There is nothing else being talked about between here and the mussel shell. Hattie Dunn came on the 6th day with a coffee tin. She set it on the kitchen table and took the lid off, and Abigail looked in it and sat down. Hattie. $312. What is this? It's the Antlers book, Hattie said. Every man that bet against him come in Monday and paid, and then Loomis got up on a chair and said he didn't want it, and then Pyle said he didn't want it, and then it turned into the kind of evening this county has about once in a generation. She pushed it across. Some of them men don't have $3, honey. There's a fella in there put in 11, and he's got a wife. Abigail put both hands flat on the table. It's not enough. No. It's $312 against $2,400. I can do arithmetic, Abby. Then why? Hattie Dunn sat down across from her and folded her hands. Because for 16 months, this county watched a woman get it alive, and every last one of us decided it wasn't our business, she said. That tin ain't for your note, honey. That tin's an apology. You can spend it, or you can throw it in the creek, and it'll have done its job either way. Samuel Whitaker came on the 7th. He stayed off the porch. He stood at the bottom of the steps with his hat in his hand, like a man who had learned something recently and was still getting used to the fit of it. Abigail. Mr. Whitaker. Coils bound over. Grand jury in November. He hasn't denied one word of it, and he won't, and I'll tell you honestly, it'd be easier on all of us if he would. I know. I've come to make you an offer, and I'd like to make it standing right here so you can shut the door on it. Make it. I'll pay the note. All of it on the 22nd out of my own pocket, and I'll take in exchange a 20-year lease on stockwater at the Willow Creek bottom. 40 cents an acre-foot, which is under the rate, and both of us know it. He turned his hat once. You keep the land. You keep the grave. You keep the horse. I get the water, which is the only thing I ever wanted off you, and I get it without a courthouse step. Abigail stood there a long moment. That's a fair offer. It's better than fair, and I'd not say so if I didn't need you to know I know it. Then why does it feel like losing? Because you'd be beholden, Whitaker said, and you'd be beholden to me, and there is a piece of you that would rather stand on a courthouse step than shake my hand. He put his hat on. I'm not asking you to answer today, but ma'am, you're 9 days out, and that horse is standing on 3 legs, and hope is not a thing a bank takes. He'd got as far as the buggy when she said it. Mr. Whitaker. Ma'am. Come to the demonstration. I intend to. No, sir. Come as a buyer. Whitaker turned around slowly. I don't run bloodstock. You will, Abigail said. You've got 200 cow ponies on that outfit, and every one of them's out of some accident. And you've told me twice in 2 years that a range horse in this country's got to be able to go 40 miles on nothing. Well, that stallion came out of the Judith Basin on reservation blood, and he went 11 miles on a hock laid open to the bone with 4 men riding behind him, and he did not fall. Her voice was shaking. Don't pay my note. Buy a season, same as any man there, and do it out loud. Samuel Whitaker stood in her yard and looked at her for a good 5 seconds. You'd rather I bid than help? Yes, sir. Why? Because if you help me, I'm a widow you were kind to, Abigail said. And if you bid, I'm a woman who had something you wanted. Whitaker started to say something and stopped and got in his buggy. $20 a season is the going rate in this territory, he said. I know it. I'll open at 50. 2 days out. Caleb Walker came in from the barn at 9 at night and said the sentence Abigail had been waiting 9 days to hear and could not stand hearing. I'll not ride him. She'd been at the table with the invitations list. She put the pencil down. Say that again. The leg's cool. The wound's closing. He'll be sound in a month, and he'll be sound the rest of his life, and I'd bet my hands on it. Caleb stayed by the door. But he ain't sound in 2 days. 2 days he's a horse who can walk. He can't carry a man, and I'll not ask him to. 61 people are coming. Yes'm. They are coming to see a man ride him. They are. Then what am I supposed to do? Her voice went up and she let it. Stand up in front of 400 people and say, I'm sorry. Come back in October. The note is due in 11 days. Mr. Walker, there is no October. There is the 20th, and then there is nothing. I know it. Then ride him. No, ma'am. One time around the pen, at a walk. Nobody's asking for a gallop. 200 pounds on a hock that was open 6 days ago, Caleb said. One misstep, one shy at a crowd of 400 people, and he sets down on it wrong and he's finished, and then I've killed him for money in front of your whole county. It's my money. Yes'm, it is. It's my ranch. That too. "And it is my husband's horse," Abigail said. "And you have been on this place 19 days. The kitchen went very quiet. Caleb Walker took that the way. He took everything standing still, with his hands at his sides. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "That's true." And he went out. She sat there about 90 seconds, and then she was off the chair and out the door and across the yard, and he was at the fence with his back to the boards the way he'd been the first morning. "Mr. Walker." "Ma'am." That was a wicked thing to say, and I knew it while it was coming out of my mouth. It wasn't wicked, it was true. Both things can be so. She sat down in the dirt beside him, which she had never done. "You're the only person in 16 months who's told me no." "That can't be right." "It's exactly right. Everybody else told me yes, and then went home." She wiped her face. "Bram said yes, and sold my note. Whitaker says yes, and means it, and it still cost me the water. 27 men said yes, ma'am, and got on that horse, and every one of them was saying yes to themselves." She pulled her knees up. "You're the only one who ever said no to my face and stayed." Caleb Walker looked at the ground between his boots. "Ma'am, I want to ride him worse than I've wanted anything since the war," he said. "You know that." "I do. And if I do it Saturday, I'll have done to him exactly what every man in this county's done to him, which is, take something off him because I needed it." He rubbed his palms together slow to still them. "There's one thing I own. I've got no land and no money and no name worth saying, and the one thing I own is that horse has never once been sorry he trusted me. I'll not spend it to save your ranch." Abigail sat there in the dirt. "Then we'll do it without a ride," she said. "Ma'am, we'll do it without a ride, and I'll tell them the truth before they've had time to imagine anything else, and then we will show them what he actually is." She stood up. "Because I have been thinking about it wrong for 16 months. Mr. Walker, and so has every man in Montana. They never wanted him ridden. They wanted him beat. And a man who's paying $20 a season isn't paying for a saddle horse. He's paying for what comes out of that horse's colts, and there is not one thing in a colt that comes from a saddle." Caleb got up off the ground. "You're going to show him loose." "I'm going to show him loose." "In front of 400 people." "Yes." "Ma'am, that's the whole thing on one throw. If he spooks, if he pins his ears at a child, if one fool fires a gun in the crowd." "Then I'll lose it loud," Abigail said. "I told you in August I'd rather." They came from 4 territories. There were 300 people on that place by 9 in the morning, and better than 400 by 11. And Hattie Dunn had a table, and Jed Pyle had a notebook, and there were 11 breeders down from the front with their hats off, and their arms on the new 8-foot plank Caleb had built with borrowed lumber in 90-degree heat. At noon, Abigail Carter climbed up on a wagon box, and the whole yard went quiet, and she found she had no notes and didn't want any. "You've all come a long way, and I'm going to tell you the truth first, because I've had a great deal of untruth told about me this summer, and I've got no stomach to add to it." Her voice carried farther than she expected. 9 days ago, a man cut my gate and put this horse through a wire fence and left him standing in a dry coulee to be shot. He's alive. He's mending. He is not sound. And there will be no ride here today." The noise came up out of that crowd like water out of a broken dam. She stood there and took it. "You may go," she said when it dropped. "The road's the way you came, and there's no charge and no hard feelings, and I'd not blame one of you." Nobody moved. A big man near the front called out, "Ma'am, I come 310 miles." "Yes, sir, I know it." "To see a horse walk?" "No, sir," Abigail said. "To see who he walks to." And she nodded at the barn, and Caleb Walker came out with nothing in his hands at all. No halter, no rope, no stick, no grain, no lead. He walked out into the middle of that yard in front of 400 people and turned around and stood there. And behind him, the black stallion came out of that barn door at a walk with a bandage on his hock and a white crown on his face and put himself at that man's shoulder. Somebody in the crowd said, "God Almighty." Caleb walked 20 feet. The horse walked 20 feet. Caleb stopped. The horse stopped. Caleb turned and walked back the way he'd come, and the stallion turned with him on the inside, matching him step for step close enough that a man's sleeve brushed his neck at every stride, and 400 people stood in that yard and did not make a sound. Then Caleb Walker stopped in the middle of the yard and stepped away. He walked 10 paces out and turned around and stood there with his arms down and left that stallion standing loose and unhaltered in an open yard with 400 strangers on every side of him and no fence between. Every soul there understood what they were looking at. Every one of them had spent a lifetime around horses and knew to the bone what a loose stud in a crowd meant. The stallion didn't move. He stood where the man had left him, and he looked at nothing but that man. And after 11 seconds, Caleb Walker said not loud, "All right." And the horse came to him. The yard broke. Men were shouting, hats went up. Somebody was pounding on the plank fence, and a breeder from Cheyenne named Fairbairn shoved forward to the front rail with his face working. That mark, Mrs. Carter, that mark on his face. "Sir, I bought a mare out of the Judith Basin in '69, had that same bent crown, and I have got 9 of her get on my place, and there is not one of them that ever came up short in a 100-mile country." He was almost shouting. "Where'd he come out of?" "Reservation range," Abigail said. "Bickle & Sons freighted him 3 years and could not break him to harness." "Could not break him," Fairbairn repeated, and turned around to the crowd with both arms up. "Gentlemen, he's got the mark, and he's got the blood, and he stood 11 miles on a cut hock and walked home, and that outfit had him 3 years and never got a colt out of him because they were too damn stupid to ask him nice." Whitaker's voice came from the back flat and carrying. $50 a season, 5 mares. The yard turned around. Fairbairn didn't even look at him. 60, 10 mares, 65. A man from Miles City. "I'll take 4 at 65 and I'll bring them in April." Jed Pyle was writing so fast he broke his pencil, and Hattie Dunn shoved another one at him without looking. They subscribed 41 mares in 50 minutes. Abigail Carter stood on that wagon box with her hand over her mouth while Jed added the column 3 times because he did not believe it either. And when he had it, he climbed up beside her and turned the notebook around so she could see the figure at the bottom. $2,665. Half down in hand, by the terms she'd printed herself in 60 invitations she'd signed at her own kitchen table. $1,332.50 in gold and paper that afternoon in a coffee tin that had held her mother's wedding set in August. And Samuel Whitaker came up to that wagon box with his own $162.50 counted out, and he handed it up to her, and he said so that the men around him could hear it. "For 5 seasons, ma'am. Bought and not given." "Yes, sir. You were right and I was wrong, and I'll say it in Pyle's paper Thursday." "That won't be necessary." "It surely will," Whitaker said. "There's a great many people in this county owe you a printed word, and I mean to be first in line before the price goes up." She paid the note on the 19th of September, 3 days early in the front room of the Willow Creek Land Office with Hattie Dunn and Caleb Walker standing behind her, and Elias Bram had ridden down from Helena for no reason on earth but to watch it, and he took his hat off when she signed. "Mrs. Carter." "Mr. Bram. In 11 years, I have never once been glad to be wrong about a piece of paper. You told me to go live with my sister in Bozeman. I did. I still don't have one." "No, ma'am," Bram said. "I'm beginning to think you never needed one." He was gone from the land office before the ink dried, and Abigail Carter found him behind her own barn 20 minutes later with the pack mule tied to the rail and a bedroll half rolled on the ground. She stood there in her good dress with the paid note folded in her hand. "Mr. Walker." "Ma'am." "What is that?" "That's a bedroll. I can see it's a bedroll." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "I'd like to know why it's out here and not in my hayloft where it's been for 31 days. Caleb didn't stop what he was doing, which was how she knew it was real. He'd have stopped for anything else. "Note's paid," he said. "It is. Horse is mending. He'll be sound by the first snow, and he'll cover 41 mares in the spring, and there ain't a man from here to Cheyenne that'd call him unhandleable now." He pulled a strap through and set his knee on the roll. "The thing I come for is done, ma'am." "You came for a horse." "I did." "And you're going to walk out of here and leave him." That got him. His hand stopped. "That's the cruelest thing you've said to me," he said quietly. "Then answer it. Caleb Walker stood up and turned around and put his hat straight, and Abigail saw the whole thing on his face before he opened his mouth, and it was not what she had expected. She had expected restlessness. She had expected a man who couldn't sit still in one place. What was on him was fear. "Ma'am, do you know what they're saying in town?" "They're saying a great many things. They're saying the drifter saved the widow's ranch." He said it flat. "Loomis said it to my face at the Mercantile Tuesday, and he meant it kind, and I had to walk out in the road." "Why?" "Because it ain't true, and every time a man says it, it gets truer." He took the hat back and turned it in his hands. "You sold your mother's rings in July. You put $100 in gold on a fence post and dared the whole male sex to come get it. You stood on a wagon box in front of 400 people and told them there'd be no ride, which is the bravest thing I have witnessed in my life, and I was in the war. And in about 6 months, there'll be a story in this county with me at the front of it, and you standing off to the side of it holding a pie, and I will not be able to stop it, and I would rather be 40 miles away when it happens." Abigail looked at him a long moment. "So you'd leave to protect my name?" "Yes'm." "That is the stupidest thing I have ever heard a grown man say." Caleb blinked. "You'd take the one person who knows what actually happened here, and you'd send him out of the county," she said, "so that the story could be told by men who weren't there. Mr. Walker, that isn't protecting me. That's you being frightened of something and dressing it up in manners, and I have had a summer of men dressing things up in manners, and I find I have no patience left for any of it." "Ma'am, what are you frightened of?" He didn't answer. "You walked in front of a rifle in a coulee 11 miles from here." "That's different." "How is it different?" "Because a rifle only takes the one thing," Caleb Walker said. And there it was out in the open between them, and neither of them had a place to put it. He got the strap fastened. She stood there holding a folded piece of paper that said, "Willow Creek Ranch belonged free and clear to Abigail Carter," and she felt it going wrong the way you feel a wagon starting to slide on a grade. "Wait, ma'am, I'm not asking you to stay for me. Hear the whole of it before you say no." She made herself slow down. "I have got 41 mares coming in April. 41. $200 of fence to build, and a breeding book to keep, and a stallion that will let exactly one man on this earth put a hand on him, and that man is standing in front of me with a bedroll under his arm." She held up the note. "This isn't a kindness, sir. It's a job. It's the biggest job in this county, and if you walk off it in September, you will have handed me a ranch I cannot run." Caleb stood very still. "That's a hard way to put it." "It's an honest way." "It's both," he said, "and you know it's both, and that's a thing about you that I have not got the better of one time since August." "Then say yes." "Ma'am." "Say yes, Mr. Walker, and put the bedroll back in my loft, and we'll neither of us say another word about the rest of it until the mares are gone home in June." Her chin came up. "I'm not asking you for anything you're afraid of. I'm asking for 8 months of work, and I'll pay you $30 a month, which is 5 over the going rate, and I'll not hear an argument about the 5. Caleb Walker looked at that mule, and looked at the barn, and looked at the hill where Daniel Carter was buried. "30 a month," he said. "Yes. And in June we'd talk." "In June?" Abigail said, "we would talk." He untied the mule. Hattie Dunn heard about it before supper, because Hattie Dunn heard about everything before supper, and she came out Thursday and sat in that kitchen and said, 8 months. "Don't." 8 months, she says, like a woman ordering lumber. "Hattie, honey, I have buried a husband and 3 children, and I am going to say one thing, and then I'll hush about it forever." She put her cup down. "There is no rule that says you get one. There's a lot of women in this territory believe there is. They put a man in the ground, and they decide the door's shut, and they spend 30 years being admired for it, and I'll tell you what admiration is worth in January." Abigail didn't say anything. "Daniel Carter was the best man I ever knew, and I'd have said so at his funeral if anybody'd asked me to speak," Hattie said. "And he'd have run that drifter down the road and made him stay if he was here to do it, and you know that better than I do." "That's the trouble." "What is?" "That I know it," Abigail said. "That I can hear him saying it. Rance Coyle's trial came on the 14th of November in Miles City, and it lasted a day and a half, and the courtroom was full because there had not been anything like it in that country in 10 years. He pled to all of it. Malicious destruction of a fence, and gate theft of a domestic animal, and forgery of a merchant's book, which was the one that carried real weight because it was the one that cost a rich man money. Caleb Walker testified for 11 minutes and never raised his voice. The prosecutor asked him to describe the condition of the animal when found. "Cut in 3 places, sir. High on the near hock was the bad one, 8 inches laid open dirt in it 8 hours. And in your opinion, was the animal put through that wire deliberately?" "Yes, sir." "On what do you base that?" "He went through standing still," Caleb said. "A horse that's run into wire tears it and takes a post with him." This was 3 strands parted slow with an animal held on a rope, and I'd say the same in front of any man who's ever built a fence. The defense lawyer got up and was clever for 6 or 7 minutes about drifters and reward money and a widow's gratitude. And Caleb Walker sat there and let him be clever. And at the end of it, the lawyer said, "Mr. Walker, isn't it a fact that you have no property, no employer of record, and no fixed residence in this territory?" "That was a fact in August, sir." "And now I got a job and a loft to sleep in and $30 a month," Caleb said, "and I'd have told you all 3 of them things without you asking, because I ain't ashamed of any of it, and I don't intend to start today." The room made a sound. The judge knocked it down. Then Abigail Carter was called, and she said the facts plainly, and at the end, the prosecutor asked her what the county ought to do with Rance Coyle, and the widow of Daniel Carter stood up in that box and did a thing that nobody in the room was ready for. "Your Honor, I'd ask the court for leniency." The prosecutor turned around and stared at her. "Mrs. Carter." "I know what I said, sir." "That man cut your gate." "He did." "He put your husband's stallion in a dry coulee to be shot at 4 in the morning. "He did that too," Abigail said. "And he did it because 11 men in this county spent 16 months telling me that horse was a killer, and I let them. And because Bickle and Sons put a man on 80 head of green horses with no help and no time, and paid him by the load. And because when he came out of that pen with his hand ruined, they put him on a wagon seat and never asked him a question. And because Samuel Whitaker hired him after, and never asked him one either." She was gripping the rail. "I am not saying he isn't guilty. He is guilty, and he said so, and I want it written down. I am saying that every single person who could have stopped it stood around and watched, and I was one of them. And if this court means to put the whole weight on the one man who did the cutting, then it is doing the same thing to him that it did to the horse." The courtroom went dead quiet. The judge looked at her for a while. "Mrs. Carter, in 19 years on this bench, I have never had a complaining witness argue for the defendant." "No, sir, I imagine not." "Is there anything else?" "Yes, sir." She let go of the rail. "Whatever he serves when he's finished, I don't want him run out of this territory. That's how it's always done, and it's how we got here." They gave Rance Coyle 2 years. He turned around when they took him out, and he found Abigail in the 2nd row, and he opened his mouth and nothing came, and Abigail Carter nodded at him once, and that was the whole of it. In the hall afterward, Samuel Whitaker put his hat on and said, "That was either the most decent thing I ever saw or the most foolish." "Yes, sir." "Which do you reckon it was?" "I don't know," Abigail said. "But I've got a horse in my barn who had a man down under his feet with every right in the world, and stepped over him. And I have been thinking about that animal since August, and I have decided I would rather be wrong the way he was wrong." Whitaker was a moment answering. "My father bought his first section off a bankrupt in 71, he said. I've told that story at supper for years like it was cleverness." He looked down the hall. "I don't tell it anymore." Winter came down hard in December, and did not let up until the first week of March, and it was the best winter of Abigail Carter's life, and she never once said so out loud. Caleb flushed that hawk twice a day into November, and once a day into December, and by Christmas there was a white seam of hair across it, and no heat in it at all. He turned the stallion out into the small pasture on the 3rd of January, and the horse stood in the gate for a minute, like a man testing ice, and then went out into that snow and ran the whole fence line twice at a dead gallop, with his tail up over his back and snow coming off him in sheets. Abigail came out on the porch with a dish towel still in her hand. "Is he all right?" Mr. Walker, is he? He's sound, ma'am. You're certain? Look at him. Caleb had his arms up on the rail. Look at his hind end drive. There ain't a thing in the world wrong with that horse, and there never has been. She stood there and watched him run. Daniel never saw him do that, she said. No, ma'am. 8 months he sat on a bucket in that corral, and he never once saw him run like that. He saw something better, Caleb said. What? He saw him come close, said Caleb Walker. Anybody can watch a horse run. Running's the easiest thing they do. It's the coming close that costs them. They ate supper together every night that winter, and they got in the habit of the steps afterward even in the cold, sitting out with coffee in their hands and their breath showing. And it was on those steps that Abigail told him about April of '75. All of it, the flood and the sorrel gelding and the mile and a half, and what a man looks like after a day and a half in a spring creek, which she had never told one living soul, including Hattie Dunn. Caleb didn't say a word the whole time. At the end of it, she said, I've never said that out loud. No, ma'am. Aren't you going to tell me something? People always tell you something. I ain't got anything to tell you, Caleb said. There's nothing a man says to that. I've heard 'em all said to me, and every one of 'em is a fella trying to get out of the room. Abigail put her cup down and cried, and Caleb Walker sat there and let her, and did not touch her, and did not leave. That was February. He rode the stallion for the first time on the 9th of March, and there was not one soul on that place to see it, but Abigail Carter and a mule. He'd been at it 3 weeks by then, a little at a time. A blanket, then a surcingle, then a saddle set on, and taken off 40 times over 8 days, without a girth ever being pulled tight, and the horse had taken all of it standing loose in the middle of that pen, with no rope in the county on him. On the 9th of March, Caleb tightened the girth. Mr. Walker. Ma'am. Do you want me out of the pen? No, ma'am. I want you exactly where you are, and I want you to talk to him. About what? Don't matter. He knows your voice better than he knows mine, and he's known it longer. Caleb ran the stirrup down. Just don't stop. So Abigail Carter stood in the middle of that corral with her hands at her sides and talked to a black stallion about nothing in the world, while a man put his foot in the stirrup for the first time in that horse's life. There's 41 mares coming in April, she said. 41 and 11 of them are Fairbairns, and he says he's bringing them himself in a train of wagons like a circus, and Hattie says the whole town'll turn out to watch them come in, and I told her that was ridiculous. Caleb put weight in the stirrup. The horse's ear came back. Keep on, ma'am. And Whitaker's sending 5, and he's sending his boy Emmett with them, that child who found the tracks, and he's to stay a month and learn. And Mr. Whitaker asked me, if that would be all right. He did not tell me he asked. Caleb came up. He came up slow and easy, and put his leg over and sat down light as a hat. The stallion stood. He stood absolutely still with a man on his back in the middle of a pen, with no rope and no snubbing post, and no rider's hand on anything but a rein lying slack on his neck, and Abigail Carter stopped talking in the middle of a word. Ma'am. I'm sorry, I... Keep talking, please. I don't know what to say. Anything. How was Daniels? Abigail said, and her voice came apart. He was Daniels, and he wouldn't let anybody, and there were 27 men, and every one of them said he was broke in the head, and I stood at that rail, and I let them say it, and Mr. Walker, look at him, he's just standing there. Yes'm. Ask him to walk. I ain't going to ask him, Caleb said. I'm going to wait. They waited. 11 seconds, maybe 12. And then the black stallion took one step forward on his own, and then another, and walked out across that pen, carrying a man for the first time in his life. And he did it the way he'd walked 11 miles out of a coulee behind a pair of ruined boots, which is to say, he did it because he had decided to. Caleb rode him 3 times around, and got down and stood there with one hand on his neck for a long while with his face turned away. Abigail said, Mr. Walker. Give me a minute, ma'am. Take 2, she said. The mares came in April, and the county did turn out to watch, and Hattie Dunn set up a table at the gate, and made more money in 4 days than she made in November, and Fairbairns 11 came in a train of 5 wagons, exactly as promised, with a man walking at the head of the first one. 41 mares went homebred that spring, and 38 came back in foal, which was a number that got printed in 3 territories, and the first of the colts hit the ground in March of 78. The second one out was a black colt with a bent white crown between his eyes. Abigail Carter sat down in the straw of that foaling stall at 4 in the morning and put her hand over her mouth, and Caleb Walker crouched down beside her and said nothing for a while. He passed the mark. He did. He passed the mark, Mr. Walker. Ma'am, in about 2 years there is going to be a man in Cheyenne paying $400 for that colt right there, Caleb said, and he ain't going to know a solitary thing about a coolie or a widow or a fella sitting in the dirt outside a fence, and I find I'm at peace with that. Word got out the way. Word does. And by the summer of 78, there were young men riding into Willow Creek Ranch asking for work. They weren't offered, and lessons they hadn't paid for, and Abigail turned away the first 4, and then stopped turning them away. They took 6 that year. They took 9 the next. Caleb Walker never once made a speech at them. He gave them a bucket and a fence and a mean-tempered pony each, and he sat with them, and the ones who couldn't stand it left inside a week, and the ones who could stayed a season and went home changed and told their fathers things their fathers didn't want to hear. A boy from Deadwood asked him in front of the whole crew once what the trick was. There ain't a trick. There's got to be something, sir. 27 men. There's one thing, Caleb said, and you'll not like it, and you'll go home and tell folks I never told you nothing. Try me, sir. Caleb Walker set his coffee down. The strongest hand ain't the one that controls, he said. It's the one that understands. And understanding cost you time, and time is the only thing on this earth a man can't get more of, which is exactly why every single one of them 27 fellas reached for a rope instead. Nobody said anything for a while. The boy from Deadwood said, "That's it. That's it. 19 days of sittin' in the dirt." "Son," Caleb said, "it was 4 years of the war, and 9 years of drifting, and 19 days of sittin' in the dirt, and I'd do the 4 and the 9 again for the 19. Now get up. That pony ain't going to ignore you by himself." He asked her in June of 78, and he did it in the worst possible way, and Abigail told the story at the supper table for the next 30 years. They were at the fence. They were always at the fence. "Ma'am." "Mr. Walker." "It's June." "I'm aware." "You said in September that in June we'd talk." "I said that in September of 1876, Abigail said. "It is June of 1878. You are 12 months late, sir." 21. "You've counted." "Every day of 'em," Caleb Walker said, and then went quiet so long she thought he'd lost his nerve entirely. "Say it." "I'm working on it." "Say it, Caleb." That was the first time she'd used it. He heard it, and he closed his eyes for a second. "I got land," he said. "I got a gray horse and a mule and 2 years of wages in a tin, and everything else I got is standing in that pasture, and it don't belong to me. And I have thought about this in every possible arrangement, ma'am, and there ain't one where I come out looking like anything but a man who married a ranch." "I don't care." "You will. Some fellow will say it at a sale barn and you'll hear it. Then he'll be wrong and I'll be married," Abigail said. "Those two things sit together perfectly comfortable." Caleb turned around. "There's the other thing." "Say the other thing." "Daniel Carter's buried on that hill." He said it very carefully. "He built that barn with his own hands, and I have worked in it every day for 2 years, and there ain't a beam in it. I haven't been grateful to him for, and I will not stand in a house that man built and pretend he ain't there." Abigail Carter looked out at the pasture for a while. "I'll tell you what I want," she said, "and I've had 21 months to get it right, so don't interrupt me." "No, ma'am. I don't want you to take his place. There isn't a place. That's the thing nobody understands, and I've stopped trying to explain it to people." Her voice was steady. "I loved a man for 9 years, and he drowned in a creek chasing a heifer that wasn't worth $11, and I will be angry about that heifer until the day I die. That doesn't go anywhere. It isn't a room you clean out." She turned to face him. "But there is more of me than there was in 75, Caleb. That's what nobody says. Grief doesn't just take. It grows the thing too. I am bigger than I was, and I have got room in me now that I did not have then, and I'd like to give it to somebody, and I would very much like it to be you, and I am about done asking politely." Caleb Walker took his hat off. "Ma'am. Don't you ma'am me." "Abigail." "Yes." "Will you have me?" "I've been having you since the 9th of August, she said. "You're just slow." They married in September, in the front room of the house with Hattie Dunn and Jed Pyle and Doc Ames and Tom Ratliff and both Sawyer brothers, and a boy named Emmett Whitaker, standing up in the back, and Samuel Whitaker gave her away because she asked him to, and because there was nobody else, and he cried, which surprised the entire county, and Whitaker most of all. Afterward, on the porch, he said, "You know I'd have taken this place off you in '76. "I know it, and you asked me to walk you across a room." "Yes, sir." "Why?" "Because you wrote a paper on your own porch rail in front of 3 men when you didn't have to," Abigail said. "You've done a great many things I don't care for, Mr. Whitaker, but when it counted, you got your boots." Whitaker looked out at the pasture. "You've cost me 20 years of that water at 40 cents, he said. "Cheapest I ever bought anything in my life, and I'd have paid $1. "I know." "You knew then." "Sir," said Abigail Walker, "I have been running a ranch alone in this county since April of 1875. I have known the price of everything for years." Rance Coyle came out in the fall of '78. He didn't come to Willow Creek. He went to Fort Benton and hired on at a livery and mucked stalls for $1 a day with one good hand, and it was Jed Pyle who wrote it in a letter, and Caleb read the letter twice and put it on the table. "He's 41 miles away." "I know," Abigail said. "Doing stalls." "I know." Caleb went out and stood at the fence a long time. They talked about it for 3 days, and then Abigail Walker wrote a letter herself and did not show it to anybody. And what it said was that there was a job at Willow Creek for a man who knew freight stock, that it paid $25 a month, that he would not be permitted within 100 yards of the Black Stallion for any reason ever, and that he could take it or throw the letter in the stove and no one would speak of it again. He didn't answer for 6 weeks. Then, in December, a man came up the road on foot in bad weather and stopped at the gate and would not come past it, and Abigail went down and Caleb went with her. "Ma'am." "Mr. Coyle." "I ain't going to be able to say anything worth hearing," Rance Coyle said. "I have tried it out on the road for 11 days, and there ain't a sentence in it." "Then don't." "I gotta say one thing." "All right." Coyle stood there in the cold with his ruined hand in his coat. "You spoke for me," he said, "in that courtroom, and I have thought about it every day for 2 years, and I cannot get to the bottom of it. And I'd like to know why, because if I don't know why, ma'am, I don't know how to be from here on out." Abigail Carter Walker thought about it. "Because that horse stepped over you," she said. Coyle's face worked. "And I decided," she said, "that I would not be a smaller creature than my own stallion." He worked there 11 years. He never once went near the black horse, and the black horse never once went near him, and they lived 400 yards apart for over a decade, in a kind of arrangement that nobody on that place ever discussed in front of him. And when Rance Coyle died in 1889 of a bad winter and a bad chest, Caleb Walker dug the grave himself and would not let anybody spell him at it. Midnight Crown covered mares until he was 22 years old. There were 411 of his get by the time it was done, and the bent white crown came down through them like a signature. And by the middle 90s, there were men in Wyoming and the Dakotas, and clear into Oregon, paying a premium for it, and not 1 in 50 could have told you where it came from. That was the way Caleb wanted it, and he said so. They put out a bulletin every spring that Abigail wrote herself, and every year it carried the same line at the bottom, set in the same type, and Jed Pyle never charged her for it, handled loose. "No horse on this place has ever been thrown or roped down." Men rode in to argue about it for 20 years. The old stallion went blind in his right eye at 26 and went on running the fence line anyway. And there was a September morning in 1900 when Abigail Walker came out on the porch and he was standing in the middle of the pasture with his head up, listening. And she watched him a while and then went in and put her hand on her husband's shoulder. "Caleb." He knew from her voice. I was 70 years old and his hands shook every day by then, and not just some days. And he went out there in his shirt sleeves and walked out into that pasture and stood in front of a blind horse and said, "It's me." The stallion put his head down over the man's shoulder, the way he had done in a coulee 24 years earlier, with a rifle pointed at both of them, and he stood there breathing on the back of that man's neck. And that was where he went down, and Caleb Walker was sitting in the grass with the horse's head in his lap when it finished. Abigail came out and sat down beside them, and did not say anything for a long time. "He was 30, Caleb said finally. "He was. There ain't a horse in 100 gets 30. No. And the whole county called him crazy for 4 years. Caleb wiped his face with the heel of his hand. 4 years, Abby. Nobody would put a hand on him. 27 men. 28, Abigail said. They buried him on the hill. They had to hire a crew to do it, and it took 2 days and cost more than a good saddle horse. And there were people in Willow Creek who thought it was a foolishness and said so. And there were more who drove out on the Sunday after and stood at the fence with their hats in their hands. And Tom Ratliff, who was 81 and had been the very first man that horse put in the dirt, came out on a cane and stood at the grave for 10 minutes, and then said to nobody in particular, "He never once come at me after I was down, not once. I told folks that in 76 and they laughed at me in the antler." They put him 10 feet from Daniel Carter, and Abigail chose the spot, and nobody had to ask her why. She lived until 1912. In her last years, there were young men who came out to that ranch and asked to hear it from her directly, because by then it had been printed in a stock journal and told wrong in 2 books, and she would sit on that porch with a blanket over her knees and set them straight in about 4 minutes. "They say your husband tamed him, ma'am." "Which husband?" "The second one, Mr. Walker." "Then they say it wrong." Abigail Walker would answer every single time in the same words. Nobody tamed that horse. Not one soul ever laid a hand on that animal that he did not first give permission for. And if you take one thing away from this porch, let it be that. "Then what did he do, ma'am?" "He sat down," she said, "in the dirt, with his back to him and his hands empty for 19 days, while an entire county stood at that gate and laughed at him. That is the whole of it. That is the entire secret, and every man who's come out here for 30 years has gone home disappointed by it." And when they asked her, as they always did at the end, whether she had ever been sorry, she put that notice in the paper. The widow of Daniel Carter and the wife of Caleb Walker gave the same answer she had given the first man who asked it in 1879. "I put $100 in gold on a fence post and asked for a real cowboy," she said, "and 27 men came for the money and 1 man came for the horse. That's the difference. That was always the difference. And I'd sell my mother's rings again tomorrow to find out which kind a man is, because in this life you will meet a great many people who want to break the thing that's hurting, and only a few who will sit down in the dirt and wait for it, and those few are worth every acre you own." She never once called that horse broken. Neither did the man who rode him. And that is why a stallion no one could touch carried 1 rider for 22 years. Why a ruined woman kept her husband's land, and why in that country for 100 years after they said it, plain to every boy who ever picked up a rope, strength takes what it can hold, but patience keeps what it earns.